If you're thinking of building an app on Bubble, pricing is something you're going to need to understand. Will you be able to afford running your app? Will you be able to monetize it? Will you actually be in control of your app's costs? If you've already looked into Bubble's pricing, you may be confused by things like workload units, which is how Bubble measures your app's overall activity and thus cost to run. In fact, you may have found yourself hesitant to move forward with Bubble at all because of how unpredictable and out of control these costs might seem. Rest assured, however, that with the details in this video, you can make a logical decision about whether it makes sense to use Bubble for your app and what to anticipate with pricing. Stick around until the end because we're also going to talk about reasons your costs could spike and how to avoid them. All right, when it comes to Bubble pricing, there's a variable component here. Not all apps are made equal. So some are simpler, some may require more processing power behind the scenes in order to work properly, to perform well as well. And this concept of variable pricing, where you may be charged a dynamic amount every month, is something you may have come across with other web applications and services. For example, with payment gateways like Stripe or PayPal, they will typically charge you a fee, a percentage of every transaction. With email marketing, they may charge you based off of the number of emails you're sending every month, right? This is usage. CRMs will typically charge you based off of the number of active contacts you maintain in your account on a monthly basis. Digital marketing like Google Ads will typically charge you based off of cost per click or cost per impressions. So Bubble app is similar in that it's going to price you off of usage. Now, their unit of measurement is called the workload unit, and this contributes to your overall workload, right? And this is also measured on a monthly basis. Now, put simply, Bubble's tech stack behind the scenes, the servers, the processing power, all the resources, is responsible for powering your app's activity. Now, activity can mean a lot of different things: searching your database, making changes to your database, uploading files, communicating with API connections, and some activity takes more work than others. Some are more resource intensive. And so Bubble is going to price activity a little differently. It's just kind of like creating a weight system for different categories of activity. And Bubble will price it with a unit of measurement called the workload unit. Okay? Your monthly workload consumption is a sum of all workload units that you consumed throughout that month. And to give you a little bit of perspective on the scale of what a workload unit is, creating or modifying a database record costs half of a workload unit. Deleting a database record is only a tenth of a workload unit. Okay, there are other activities that are even smaller fractional amounts. There are other activities that are around this amount as well. So over the course of a month, Bubble is going to track all of your activity, add up all of the workload units that you use, and that's going to contribute to your monthly workload usage. Hey, real quick, if you're finding this helpful, we've put together a complete guide that will help you figure out if Bubble is right for your app. You can check it out over at coachingnocodeapps.com/bubble-guide. I've also put the link in the description below. As you can see, this guide walks you through everything from pricing to performance, IP ownership, and more. Head to coachingnocodeapps.com/bubble-guide to get immediate access. All right, I'm going to come back to the workload units in just a moment so we can see how these contribute to your subscription plan. But let's first understand what the different components are of the subscription package. So the first is your base app plan. This is bare minimum. Every single Bubble app needs to be tied to a plan. And this is going to come with a fixed monthly cost that you'll pay just like any regular subscription. And by the way, I am going to be talking about this from the perspective of monthly pricing simply because Bubble aggregates your workload usage on a monthly basis. But there are annual plans available too, and those will give you a little bit of a discount. So let's take a look at the base app plan first. Each level of your base app plan will come with a certain amount of workload units that you can use, okay? And then it resets in the next billing cycle. So right now you have a free plan available to you that comes with 50,000 workload units. You have the first paid plan, which is the starter plan, that jumps up quite a bit to 175,000 workload units, and you can see that it goes up from there. Now, also important to note, once you are on any one of the paid plans, so starter and above, you will also get an additional 100,000 workload units for your development environment, which is great to kind of give you some breathing room for testing, right? Because you will make mistakes. You will need to run things more heavily than your users will in order to test it all out, right? You're going to be making changes, you're going to make tweaks, you need to run things over and over and over again. And so having that breathing room of extra workload units in your development environment, this is your sandbox, not your live environment, is a way to kind of keep you within your limits, but still have the freedom to, build and test and make changes and not worry about exceeding your usage. Now, the workload tier is an optional add-on plan that will give you extra workload units for your monthly cycle. Okay, now this is something that you may not need. It just depends on your particular app case and the type of usage that you're experiencing. But these are a great way to add on more workload units without necessarily having to jump up in the higher base plans. Okay, you see that there's multiple tiers here. The highest tier gives you 20 million workload units, so we're talking enterprise level productions for that. Now you also have an optional overages feature that you can enable for your app as well. You don't have to turn this on, but it does act as a safety net. If your app is one where there's less predictability, maybe it has the potential to go viral, and you could see a huge spike in workload unit usage. Overages act as a pay-as-you-go type of feature for any workload units you use that exceed your monthly allocated amount. Okay, so for example, if you get 100,000 in a month and the activity in your application spikes, and before the month is over, you're now at 110,000, for example, Bubble is going to kick you into the overages. So the way that that's priced, it's a certain amount for every additional 1,000 workload units that you've gone over. Now, keep in mind, if you do have an optional workload tier added to your plan, that rate actually is lower. The higher the tier, the lower that rate is. So you get a bigger discount if you're on higher tiers. Now, again, you have the option to disable overages. If you've got a tighter budget and you don't want to have just a running bill adding up throughout the month, turning overages off will help you keep that monthly bill more contained. But be very careful with this, because if your app does exceed the monthly usage and you don't have overages enabled, you risk your app being shut off. Now, you can turn it back on if you enable overages or if you upgrade your plan, if you add a workload tier, right? As long as you give yourself the workload units, your app can come back online. And remember, not every app needs to have overages enabled. It really just depends on the environment that you've built out. So these three components contribute to your total subscription plan package. Remember, the only thing that's really required is your base plan. And depending on how you build it, that may be all you need. Okay, but if you have a more complicated application or more complex, more intensive, more unpredictable app, you may want to consider adding on additional tiers or enabling your overages. Now, with several levels of app plans and workload tiers, and then the option to enable overages, it may be a little tricky to figure out what's going to be the best combination of that package for your app. Luckily, Bubble has created a calculator so that you can punch in the number of workload units you expect to have on a consistent monthly basis, and it will calculate the best combination of those things for you so you understand and can expect what that monthly bill is going to look like. We're actually going to take a look at this in a second. I'm going to give you some perspective on this by looking at our own apps so you can see some numbers and what those monthly numbers might look like if I wanted to upgrade or change anything about my package. Before we do that, I do want to go over a few things to expect. Because of the variable nature of your workload consumption, there are some things that you are responsible for to keep your costs down, and some best practices that you want to follow so that you make things as predictable as possible. Right? Remember that Bubble apps are not all equal. The nature of this platform is that you are given the freedom and flexibility to build all sorts of custom apps, simple little tools to enterprise level operation systems for companies, right? So with that freedom, there is a lot of variability, and Bubble needs to be able to create a standardized system to price on all of that. So it is up to you to build your app in the most efficient manner possible. The first thing I want to go over is get some perspective. If you're just getting started, get some perspective on what kind of usage your app is going to require by getting started with the free or even the first paid plan, the starter plan, if you need immediate access to some of those paid only features. Okay, now here's a few rules of thumb. The more predictable your app is, the more predictable your monthly bill is going to be. And apps that are more predictable tend to be ones where they might be more internal, right? So it's maybe for a team with a fixed number of users, team members, whatever it might be. And maybe the usage is highly consistent, right? Very normal. It's going to be the same day in, day out, maybe even scheduled activities happening there. So you can very much predict about the usage your app will require in a given time frame. Less predictable applications may have some variability in their usage. So seasonal applications, right? Maybe it's a tool that helps with bookings that happen during the summer, for example. So there's going to be a higher volume of traffic there. If you have controlled access, but maybe still an unknown number of people that are coming in day in, day out, but still consistent usage, right? This is what I would consider sort of somewhat predictable. And then the less predictable applications are the ones that have the potential to go viral. They're more public facing, they're community powered. The usage is really unknown on any given daily basis, right? So this is likely less of an internal tool and more of a public facing one. Now, none of these options are bad. You just have to understand what category your app falls into. The less predictable it is, the more vigilant you're going to need to be around the efficiency of your application. Okay, the more predictable it is, the more stable that monthly bill is going to be for you. Now, in order to stay on top of everything, no matter what type of app you're building, you want to periodically evaluate your app's usage. This is especially true if you expect it to grow over time, right? Usage will change. You'll have more traffic, you'll have more logic, more complex logic potentially added into the app, more data for the application to work through as well. So as you grow your application, you want to do these periodic reviews to ensure that number one, things are still working in an optimized way. But number two, you need to check if you need to grow into a higher plan to give yourself more breathing room with workload units before you hit your limit. Okay, so growth may mean upgrading to higher level plans. And if your application is one where you're selling it, right, you have paid access, your users are paying for access to the app, then your business model should incorporate the cost of supporting this application as well. You know, if you are running a business on your application and you need to be on those higher plans, definitely take these costs into account in your own revenue model. Now, to give you some perspective on what numbers look like with live applications, I'm going to show you my metrics tab here that I have for two apps that we have. These are two live apps. They're on the first paid plan, and I've got a month's worth of workload usage to show you. Now, this tab here in the editor of this application, this is our app metrics tab. This is going to be your best friend. There's several charts here to help you understand what your usage is, broken down by activity, so you can understand where the heavier parts of activity are in your app. And really help you identify, opportunities for optimization if necessary. So this first application is our membership application. We have subscribers who come in on a daily basis to access our course content in our database of tutorials. So they're performing searches through hundreds of lessons. They are watching videos. They're taking notes. And there's a lot of interactivity happening in the application. Like I said, this is on the first paid plan, which right now, let's go back to our pricing page here, is going to be $29 a month, and it's going to come with 175,000 workload units. Okay, so we are well under that. We are in the last month hitting 35,000 units. We have so much room to have more activity in here. If we had more users on a daily basis in the application, if we had more features that were more complicated, that they're interacting with, if we had more API connections running in the application, we'd probably see higher usage with our workload units. But this is an application that we've had running for years, and it's one where we've really refined what we need it to do. So there's really not a lot of change. The up and down bars that we see here in the activity is just the users, right? On some days there will be more usage than others. Now you'll notice that there was a bigger spike here these 2 days, and that is precisely reflective of a change we made to a particular feature. It was a little bit more intensive than we thought, and so we quickly made a correction. But that's exactly what this is for. This is exactly why you want to be vigilant about these things and make it a habit to come here and evaluate your usage. Now, I do want to, if I'm trying to make a decision on what plan to be, I do want to take the entire month into account, because then I can get a better picture of what's going to be more average. I don't necessarily want to look at one specific day at a time, because that wouldn't really give me the best big picture. Now I'm going to switch over to another application that serves a different purpose. So remember, this one here are like course application, 35,000 units for the month. Our next one, it's a higher usage. So you can see the perspective of the chart has changed a little bit. The upper limit is now 14,000 over here, whereas the previous one was 4,500. So just be mindful. There's the scale changes, and so in the month we're using 100. We'll round up 160,000 workload units. We're still on the first paid plan, so that first paid plan's 175 allocated units covers us very easily. This is also a consistent, usage here. You notice that you can see throughout the week we have kind of consistent usage. There's more activity during one part of the week, and then it kind of goes down, and then it comes back up. We do have kind of scheduled things that go out, so that's to be expected. This application is actually our main website. So we do have a lot of other things going on in this application. We have scheduling tools on here. We have an internal tracking system that we have on here. We have our workshop, which is an hour-long, webinar that users can watch. And there's actually a 5-second workflow. It happens every 5 seconds, which is honestly the thing that's probably contributing to a lot of the workload usage in our app overall. In fact, if I scroll down here and drill into my levels of activity, I'm going to click into the workload here. You can see this, which is taking up the majority of the chart here. You can see right there, it's 112,000 workload units. This is for the month. It's because we've got something going on every 5 seconds. That's necessary for us because it allows us to do a particular type of tracking on an interaction. So, it's worth it for us to have a more expensive feature going on there. And I want to be clear about that too. Just because something is more expensive or has to be more complex, to make something work, doesn't mean that it's bad. You've just got to prioritize other things to allow that more expensive thing to run properly. You just got to optimize other areas so that the entire app isn't, really spiking your usage. It's a matter of balancing it all, okay? So these metrics here really help me understand on a consistent basis how the app is performing. If I see activity that starts to look unusual, it can help me pinpoint where to go and make that correction. I can continue to drill down further in this pie chart. Eventually it'll take me to the actual spot in my app where there might be a condition that is not built out properly, or a search that could probably be streamlined, something like that. Now let's head over to Bubble's subscription planner calculator so you can also get some perspective on these numbers as they relate to your plan costs. All right, so let's take a look here. The first thing we're going to do is select our billing cycle. I'm going to go with monthly so we can see the higher numbers, but there are annual plans that give you a little bit of a discount. Then you're going to want to check, you're going to select your plan type. Now I'm going to start with the starter plan because that way we can see what our lowest possible amount would be per month given a certain amount of workload units expected. But keep in mind that you may need to start on a higher plan simply to get access to other paid features that are restricted to the higher levels. The different plans are not just about the workload units. Higher plans will actually give you more collaboration features, so you can have more development environments to work with a team. You can go further back in time to restore your application, to restore your database if you need. So there are a few things that are restricted to the higher level plans. So depending on your needs, you may actually need to start on a higher base plan. We're going to start with the starter here, and remember my higher usage plan, we're going to round it to 160,000 workload units. So just to see what that gives us, it should just give us the starter plan. because we're looking at 160 and the starter plan gives us 175. And yes, there we are. So it's just the starter plan, no expected overages, no additional workload tier. If I knew that I needed to start on the growth plan simply for feature access, then that's what I'm paying for. Now, I do get many more workload units than I really need, but keep all of this in mind of like what your actual requirements are. Let's go back to the starter plan. Let's put in, let's say double, and we're going to just round it for even numbers' sake. We'll say 300,000, not quite double, but notice that 300,000 is a little bit over the growth plan. But if I specifically want to be on the starter plan, then what I need on top of that to account for the 300,000 is the first workload tier. So this is actually great because in total, I'm only paying 61 a month to get the, this would be 375, right? It will comfortably cover my 300,000, which is much lower than if I had jumped up completely to the next plan just to get extra workload units. I mean, it wouldn't have even covered me all the way, but you see that there's a big significant difference there with these like in-between workload tiers that you can add on. And that's why this tool is helpful, is just to help you find the best combination of these plans. Let's do a million workload units. So this way we can see a little bit of everything for, an entire package here. So we're looking at $141.50 a month if we want to be on the starter plan and have an additional tier. This is tier 2 now with some expected overages to cover that million a month. Notice again, tier 3, this team is 500,000 workload units. So if I needed to be on the team plan, let's switch over there. Okay, so we're looking at 473. So again, 500,000 doesn't cover my million, but I don't need as high of an additional tier to cover the rest, but I should also expect overages to cover everything here, which is the best combination versus combining this with a higher tier that also covers it, because it would be a higher cost compared to just going into overages, right? So definitely take advantage of this tool. First, decide on what level of plan you need for features, just in general. The starter plan is great for most apps that are just getting started. And then after you kind of get some perspective as you test and get started building in the free plan, you can do some measurements in the app metrics tab to start to estimate how many workload units you need a month so that you can better predict what your future bills are going to look like over time. This is something you can also come back to as your app starts to grow. Now, we've worked with literally hundreds of applications in many different industries. We've kind of seen it all, everything from small internal tools to full-blown SaaS systems. And these are some of the common culprits for high workload usage. So I want to help you keep an eye out for them. The first is recursive workflows. These are looping workflows, and you are in complete control of the logic for that loop, how frequently it runs, what happens in the workflow itself. If you're not careful with your logic here, it's very easy to end up with hundreds, if not thousands of records in your database in a matter of seconds or minutes. We've seen it happen many times. So recursive workflows are something you want to be very careful with because it can lead to a huge spike very quickly. Overly complex database searching. If you're finding that you're having to create all sorts of complicated filters or constraints on your searches, it's probably speaking to an inefficient database structure, right? So how you configure your data types, your fields, your option sets, the relationships between everything, a lot really comes down to the architecture of your database. That also leads me to my next point, right? Inefficient database modification. If you have overly complex ways of changing your records in your app or creating records or having to set up links in a clunky way, it probably says something about your architecture not being right. There are many ways to accomplish the same thing, but not every approach is necessarily going to be the most efficient. So if you're finding that things are getting too clunky or you're having to go through too many pathways just to get to a specific data point, revisit your structure. See if there's a different way to approach relationships or organizing that data. This can also lead to redundancy. With fetching data, there's lots of ways to retrieve data in your designs and display it back to your user, or just use them in your logic in general. You don't want to be redundant. You want to consolidate and streamline as much as possible. One of the rules of thumb here with efficient workload usage is only fetching data when you need it, right? Don't just have it happening in the background just because. Only fetch data when you need it, because there's a cost to that. So you want to be as efficient as possible. Same thing goes for your workflow logic. You have the ability to stop things from running if you don't need them to run. So something we see come up all the time is unnecessary calls to APIs with those third-party integrations. Just because you have the connection doesn't necessarily mean that the user always needs to access it. So make sure that every single flow is very intentional and you're not just doing things just because. Get away from this concept of, well, I'm just going to keep it in the background just in case. And what I mean by that is, pulling data to have, and if the user's not going to ever need it, then you've just wasted your workload units. Similar to this as well is, wait for webhooks. This is a way for applications to communicate with each other. So let's say you have a connection with a Stripe payment gateway. And you want your app to be notified when a new subscription was created, for example, or a new payment has gone through or a credit card has failed. Wait for Stripe to tell you that has happened, right? That's a webhook notification. It's an app-to-app message, rather than you constantly checking, right? You don't want to check for things every 10 seconds, every hour, because that could lead to a lot of unnecessary workload usage. So obviously there are a handful of variables, and like I said, every app is different. So here are the things that you want to keep in mind to really stay in control of your app and of your app's costs. Number one, test early and test often. This is true no matter what. Doesn't matter what platform you're building on, doesn't matter what type of app you're building, doesn't matter what the pricing system is. You've got to test. You've got to get in the habit of testing and become a master at it. And do it frequently. This is going to give you more opportunity to catch things sooner, right? It ensures that you don't end up creating extra work for yourself later down the line. It also helps you find the mistakes before your users do. Test early, test often. That will help you identify any weak points or opportunities for optimization as soon as possible. Select a plan combination that is going to give you some breathing room. So even if you can predict your monthly usage pretty well, give yourself some space on that upper limit of workload units allowed in a month. You never know. You may introduce a feature that is going to be more expensive than normal, and so you don't want to be so close to your limit for the month that you end up exceeding it because of one new thing that you've added to your app. Make sure you give yourself plenty of room and, be vigilant about it. Those are things that you can always adjust. You can go up and down in the tiers if you'd like. The overages are also something to keep in mind. And with that said, make a decision on whether or not you want to enable overages. For some folks, this may just be like a budgeting decision, right? If you need to have a much more fixed cost, then your base plan and your workload tier plan are going to give you that exact fixed cost. The overages is really more of a safety net. If you ever anticipate, unexpected spikes, then that can ensure that your app is not taken offline. Make performance reviews a part of your development routine. I've said this a few times already that you need to be vigilant about everything, but this really has to be a normal thing for you. It has to be part of what it means to create and manage, maintain an application, not just for the first version, but long term. This is true for anything that you build. You've got to do routine maintenance, otherwise it can start to break down on you and you may not even notice. So if you're doing these regular reviews, you'll very much be on top of it. Calculate your expected usage with aggregate data. So don't just look at one day, right? Because one day may not be a great representative of a month's worth of workload units. If you have the data for a bigger span of time, start to go off of that. Obviously, when you just get started, you're not going to have a lot of time built up. But during your periodic reviews, as your app continues to evolve, look at your aggregate data and understand what is the general average, what's the upper limit that you hit, what's the lower limit, and help that make a decision for you in terms of what plans you want to be on. And aim for predictability, of course. If you understand on a regular basis what your usage is going to look like, you're going to have a more predictable monthly bill. Okay, so a lot of this comes down to the way that your logic has been put together in your app. You want to create everything with intention. Everything should have a reason for why it works in a certain way. Anytime something is executed in the app, it was because of something that was necessary, not just because. So conditions can really help you with that sort of thing. If you can schedule things, that also helps you control the environment, right? Because they're more consistent that way if things are scheduled. Again, not every app necessarily has the luxury of being so predictable, but aim for it as much as possible in everything that you do. All right, I hope this was helpful in guiding you through next steps with your own no-code app. And if it was, check out the content you're about to see on the next screen to take it even further.